Welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kanal, your host, and today we're here with Ariana Khan, a student at Eastern Michigan University who has led a number of initiatives on her campus to increase voter engagement. She's collaborated with orientation to embed a mentors training with a number of student organizations. She's held voter registration events. She's enacted pro-voter legislation on her own campus, creating a campus voting holiday. She has helped many queer and closeted folks get out and carry their voice and advocate for them. And she did that one-on-one and with many of her peers at Eastern Michigan. So it is a great honor to have you on the show. I always love to get the student perspective because it's us who's going to bear that mantle in now, but who's counting those days? So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. All right, so let's dive into these questions. Just to start off, pretty basic, talk a little bit about your background, why you got into voting rights specifically and advocacy work, and touch on how your college experience at Eastern Michigan is kind of preparing you for your future career, any aspirations you'd like to highlight. This is the one question where you talk about you.
Well, okay. Ever since like high school, really, I've always wanted to be involved with the surrounding community. And once I got into college, I started with orientation because that was what was most familiar to me. And it really helped me connect to a lot of different campus departments and a lot of students at various points in their college careers. And once I was able to meet with a bunch of people, it became very clear that there were various gaps in accessibility. And one that stood out the most to me was gaps in voter accessibility. So I started college in 2018. So that was around the time of the midterms. And I just noticed how many people around me were trying to vote in whatever capacity they could, but just couldn't for a number of reasons. At that point, Election Day was not an institutional holiday. So only certain majors got the day off. And even then, like they might have had election day off, but like an exam right after. So there was no real incentive to go and spend their time voting when it translated for them as a waste of time because of the other priorities that they needed to tend to. So come the next fall, it was like fall 2019, I was working in the LGBT Resource Center at that point, and I was heading a support group called Cutie Pop, which stood for Queer and Trans People of Color Collective. It wasn't necessarily a club. It was more so like it didn't have student org status. It was more so like a collective of a bunch of queer POC that got together and just talked and leaned on each other for community and support. I was working with that when my coordinator let me know about the position at Campus Elect. I applied and I got in. And initially, I just thought that my advocacy work would look like just like flyering and canvassing. I mean, it was what I did when I was like 16. And I thought that I could just continue to do that in college. And I cared, but I wasn't necessarily like as wholeheartedly invested in it as I am now because it was only when I started the position that I realized how many like systemic barriers there were. It was more than just like, oh, I have class on election day, I can't go vote. It was, I'm experiencing homelessness. Voting isn't really a top priority for me right now. Or even if I were to register to vote, I don't know what address I would put down. Or I would like to re register to vote. However, I'm afraid of having my address be publicly listed anywhere because I'm a survivor of domestic violence and I don't want my records to be easily accessible. These issues kept coming up and it just spoke to me because people were being vulnerable enough to share that with me. So I felt that it was my responsibility to try to address these things as much as possible. So yes, I am working on several initiatives through student orgs on campus, through like Washtenaw Wayne County in general, not just on EMU's campus. And most of Clear the Vote was broader than just Eastern's campus. But yeah, the work is ongoing, but I enjoy it very much. And I see myself doing this even post grad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a community that we emphasize, we advocate for, but I rarely hear any discussion on helping those people vote. We always generalize the category young people, people of color. We'll go as far to say that, at least in the 2020 election. But I have never heard of, queer people voting, and the logistics and kind of the entire conception of making that happen. It's almost foreign to me. So that's I'm very proud of the work you've done. I think it needs to be highlighted more, if you ask me. But hey, I'm not on CNN yet. Anderson Cooper they should really sponsor me. I'm just saying. But what in politics, there's a lot. There's a campaign side which kind of ties in with advocacy. There's working on the Hill, getting the administration kind of side. Why take up to this activism, community organizing space? What drew you to that specifically?
It's kinda hard to answer that question because it wasn't just one thing. I feel like it's more so just that I found myself here, more than anything. It wasn't necessarily like I thought, this one person spoke to me, so that's like the spark that ignited everything. It was more so just that, like, I was surrounded by, people like myself voicing concerns that I might not have personally faced at the time, but had maybe faced like at another point in my life or saw another friend go through this. And I was now in a position where I had access to a nonprofit organization with resources and several connections to several communities who were willing to help. So if I could be the nexus, like why not actually fulfill that role the way I always wanted to ever since I was young? Um, so yeah, like, at this point too, like, I can't really explain, like, how things have happened. They've just kind of, like, progressed the way they have, and they've developed into just, like, multiple initiatives. Yeah, it's kinda hard to, like, define that pinpoint, but I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, I mean, I fully comprehend. I'm an organizer myself. I know what it's like to go from one place to another and forget what day and time it is. Trust me, it's every day. For most of the movements and the struggle, really, you kind of just keep going, and all the monotonous and minuscule details will just fade away, and you're in a sense of oblivion, but you have a purpose, right? Which is, I think, what you're
Yeah.
saying. But it's more for the folks who don't organize. We're trying to inspire the masses, whatever that means. But let's talk about. No, go ahead. You were about to say something.
Well, I think that is one thing. I feel like there is this narrative of like young people that activism is like exceptional and that community work is like a job that like certain people take up. And it is, like you can work for a nonprofit or like volunteer at an organization or give charity. Like those are technically actions. But it's not like a one or the other type of thing. Like people are wonderfully multifaceted, and this idea that like you have to be extraordinary to make a difference is one that I also want to dispel because even just like I couldn't even tell you how many people are in Wayne County, but it's got to be thousands. But I only helped about 200. Some people would say that's a lot, but other people would look at the entire picture and say that's nothing at all. It's just a blip in like all of this. There were what, like 70 million votes casted in America? What's 200 in the realm of all of that? And I think looking at that feels a little discouraging. So I just like to remind everyone that every little bit that they do, whether it's one person, two people, 20 people, however many, someone is always going to discourage your work on the basis of all these numbers because there's always going to be a bigger one out there. But every little thing does add up. I'll get off my soapbox now and hand it back to you.
No, no. Well said. Well put. I do want to talk about your work actually. So I'm glad you brought this up. What exactly for the viewers? What exactly did you do to help those? I believe the number was 217 of your fellow peers. What did you do to get them to vote? What avenue did you use? And what are some of the core policies and objectives you were trying to accomplish in this process?
So the numbers are a little bit blurry in my head because it feels like it's been a while, but I do think it was 206 people that I met with over Zoom in like a one-on-one or a two-on-one capacity. But basically, I just put flyers all around the community and also just spread through like word of mouth and various like social media channels to people that I knew, just kind of in and around queer POC circles. That's kind of where I started, just letting people know, like, hey, I work for a nonprofit now. We're trying to get people out to the polls. And I really want to empower queer people to go out to the polls because we all really care about this election. But I was noticing certain issues that were coming up with queer students and queer young people more than other groups. There's a higher overlap with homelessness and being queer, often because of family circumstances or personal neglect or discrimination in hiring or just treatment on the job that leaves someone eventually in a situation where they find themselves unable to house themselves, right? And of course, as we've all seen with the pandemic, these circumstances were just exacerbated by not being able to find employment or the fear of getting sick in working in a service role. So there were just a lot of people that found themselves much more vulnerable than they'd like to be. So I tried to connect with those people if I ever heard that someone was going through that as much as I could. Confidentiality was key for a number of reasons. I think just like to sum it up, people just don't want other people in their business and to know that aspect of them because sexual orientation and gender identity, those are things that you learn about yourself and it's for yourself. So people don't often want those things like written in a report about them, like, oh, like, this is, Kunal, like he's bi. Like people don't always want that like stamped across their forehead or in any type of like record or anything. So confidentiality was key when meeting with these people. I think being a person who is also from these communities helped kind of establish my credibility with these people so that they would trust me a little bit more. Because I know that some of them were having difficulty trusting some of the resources offered by the university or offered by a couple of organizations, just due to like recent history with how people like us have been treated. So although it was smaller scale than what something as grand as like a university or a formal organization near us could supply, it was still enough to be able to talk with them about what specifically they needed because everybody needed different things. For some of them, it was, I don't know how to fill out an absentee ballot being homeless. Like they didn't know that they could just put the intersection of two streets and that would be enough to suffice. Some people didn't know that they had voter ID because they thought that they needed a driver's license or something and they didn't have that. They didn't know that their university ID qualifies as voter ID, or your tribal ID if you're an indigenous person. That also qualifies as voter ID. Some people just didn't really understand like the language on the ballots. English wasn't their first language, so they didn't feel comfortable filling it out. It felt a little daunting and scary. So that was other types of conversations that we had. So I can't easily say like walking through like every individual process what it was like because it was different for each person. But I guess like the general tone was one of empathy and consideration for their circumstances because every single person was just trying their best, and the fact that voting was even on their mind is just phenomenal, because although it is all of our right and civic duty, the ways that it has been made like inaccessible to us. The things that I was doing last year are things that the city should have taken care of a long time ago, but people slip through the cracks. So it really is commendable that despite all that they were thinking about and dealing with, um, and then having a pandemic on top of that, and yet they still wanted to go out to vote. Like, I really can't take credit for like all of this because it was really more phenomenal to me that they would even want to add that to the list of things that they were going through and dealing with and managing.
Yeah. So I'm a bit quiet this episode because I personally would like to I'm not confronted with these issues every day, so I'm just taking it in honestly. Um, but let's you talked about last year's election being extremely important to the groups you are working with. Why was 2020 the year where you felt this need to be done? Was it just by circumstance? Was it 2020 when you had a historic election, pandemic combo there, for $5, McDonald's that bitch. But whatever it may be, why was 2020 the year you decided to focus and really hone in on helping, communities you've been a part of?
Um, There's a number of ways I can answer this, right? Like, yes, it was a historic election. I mean, we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's rights to vote. Um, it was also a census year, so this year has been really a heavy focus on redistricting. Um, there was a lot relating to the pandemic as well. Not to get into like partisan politics so much because I think this election meant many things for many people. Um, but I think there was a concern um, for many people in multiple ways, not just on one side, that this election would be a turning point for a lot of different things. For some people, like young people, right? This was their first election or the first one that they could really pay attention to if they were still under the age of 18. So we encourage folks to vote as young as possible because it kind of sets a precedent for how the rest of your voting history is going to go. If your first election is the one where you're, first eligible to vote, like 18, 19, 20 or so, it kind of like leaves an imprint and it creates like a habit, especially if you just become aware, like with something as major as a presidential election, it makes you wonder in the years upcoming because we have election day as a holiday every single year. Like, oh, what's going on this year? It's 2021. Well, there's municipal elections. What's going on in 2022? Oh, there's midterms. So setting that baseline is really important too. Um, but especially just as like Gen Z is like really defining themselves as a culture born in the age of information, with all this access to technology and a growing awareness of what's happening around them, I think knowing that they can put like all of their words and actions from an online realm into a direct and formal way to engage with the democratic process, I think that's also really important to do, right? Like to engage in the pre-standing system with the knowledge that you've come in from. There's so many reasons. I hope I'm answering your question because I feel like I could talk about this forever, but I also don't want to get into my own personal views as to what I felt was on the line because I don't want to speak too much to partisan politics when I get into this.
Yeah. No, I don't have to be nonpartisan. F that,
I do.
whatever that means. It was a historic election. It was basically fascism versus democracy. And shit, we chose democracy by a tidge, it was close. And then a couple states pulled through. We had some Stephen Curry like clutchness with Georgia, and it happened. I'm from the Bay Area. It was basically like LeBron and Steph teamed up and said, "Hey, Georgia looks real great, and so does Pennsylvania." All right, and we won that election.
We're not going to act like Michigan wasn't a swing state,
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
okay? And how
Michigan is
Wayne
cold.
County showed up.
Michigan is cold. All right, I'm just saying.
That's not an insult, and it doesn't carry the weight you think it does.
It's cold. It's a cold place. Anyway, yes, no, several key states came in um, at very opportune times, and that changed the fate of the country. Um, so and it's setting the stage for what's going to happen in the 2022 midterms. I don't know to tell you the truth. I don't know where we're going to go. I heard we're dealing with some type of budget right now in Congress, something of that sort, something about infrastructure. I've heard over and over again. But there, I think I do understand that, personal thoughts aside, you wanted to make a difference, and I think you did, in my opinion. And like you said, the journey doesn't stop now. It never will. As soon as you put your hand in this kind of, you're just dragged in. You just keep going, and you burn out, which is kind of like, how did you cope with that? How do you recover, and how do you keep going?
Well, it was exhausting, especially in the 6 days between the actual election and the results. That was the longest stretch of my entire life. That was when I really began to feel like time was definitely relative. Um, I think it's a matter of finally knowing when you have done all you possibly can, which is hard to define, because I even look at the things that I'm trying to establish at my university, right? Because um, in the process of organizing, I found all of these lists that showed like voter friendly colleges in the state of Michigan, and Eastern Michigan was not on that list. So right now, it's my goal in my last semesters at this university to just try to establish that status as much as possible.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, so there are like different benchmarks we set for ourselves and like different standards that we want to uphold and achieve, right? So it's kind of hard to like figure out, where do I draw this line? Like, when is enough necessarily, because like you said, like the work does keep going, and you do need someone to kind of keep the momentum going, especially when it's been you. But at the same time, like, if you don't sleep, I someone said something to me the other day, like, if you don't, make time to rest, like, your body will choose it for you, and that has been, like, the truest thing, like, the amount of, like, sick days that I had to take in the winter 2021 semester, not because, like, I was actually, like, sick or anything, but just because I was just so exhausted from everything that I did alone, virtually, in a pandemic, with terrible eyesight. It was just I just needed it. I couldn't be on Zoom any longer. Like, my eyesight was getting bad. I was getting headaches all of a sudden. I needed to take some time away from it. So I didn't do as much as I wanted to, as I had planned to originally in that semester. But I'm trying to learn to be patient with myself and forgiving of the things that I couldn't accomplish while I was resting, because I only have one body. So I have to be as kind to it as possible if I want to keep her going.
Right. That's an excuse I use every day when I'm late to class. So,
Oh, come on.
uh, couple sick
I know they
days.
give you enough passing time.
No, no, no. It's so hard to wake up in the morning. I'm just
Oh, yeah.
so in case any of my teachers are listening, you heard it. You haven't heard it from me. You heard it from Ariana here, who is a credible source. So,
Hey, hey, hey. That's not what I'm here for. Don't
yeah,
get me involved in that.
have credibility for my arguments. Anyway, I'm gonna ask you. It's a very simple question. Nobody has got it wrong. I mean, there is a right answer, but everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Uh, is voting important? It's a yes or no question.
I mean, yeah.
Oh,
It's just, how do you define?
you mean yeah? Bruh, I believe the answer
Th-
is yes.
Too much pressure on this, okay? I'm just saying it's important to define importance, like, not to get too philosophical with it. But it means different things to different people, and I think that is important to recognize. Even the election years mean different things to different people. If you ask a lot of um, young people, like, what's the most important election they've ever experienced or anything, a lot of them will probably say 2016, 2020, because those are the ones that they've witnessed. But if you ask a lot of older Americans, they'll probably say 2000, um, for a number of reasons that had an outcome that we weren't expecting. So I think perspective is important to consider in all of this too, because without it, you can't properly empathize with the other party. You really just got me on a roll here. I'm not usually this talkative, so
You're welcome.
I blame you.
Uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see your point to perspective. Uh, and it's not a silver bullet. When I say voting is important, I mean, should you be doing it? Yes. Uh, is it the only thing you can do? No. And there are several steps I think you have taken to where it's tangible. You've done X and you've gotten Y. And I know I said this is not math, but I just did some math. All right, two plus two is four. Minus one, that's
Too
three.
complex for me.
Yeah, quick maths. In any case, that's I think what I mean when I say voting is it's fundamental, but you can layer, you can build on doing that very simple act. And I want to talk about voter suppression and oppression in the United States. It's a very large trend. It's one of the reasons this channel was started. What are your thoughts on current state of Georgia, Texas? We see the Texas abortion ban recently. We had the Women's March, I think, last weekend. So, with all these looming issues and conflicts, and on top of federal mishaps and infrastructure and reconciliation. I mean, what is going on in the average college student who's just trying to encourage some students to vote?
So I'm going to preface this by saying that I am representing a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, so I can't get too much into my own personal views on this while I'm wearing this hat because I don't want to misrepresent the organization that I'm here for. I do think, though, that the issues in these area are not as simple as a lot of people would like you to believe they are. Just like voting. People would like you to think that it's just a matter of, okay, let's just get the ballot in the box. Let's just, talk to the people who are doing things wrong. But I think you also need to reflect on the cultures that encourage this behavior and that kind of insist upon it, if that makes sense. These bills that restrict women's access to healthcare and the right to their own bodies, um, policies that promote voter suppression, or just make it more inaccessible in ways that are not surmountable for the average person, they don't come from a single person or from one bad representative. They come from a culture that defends this type of behavior. So I think it's important to hold your friends accountable when you see traces of these like bits of behavior in them as well. Um, it's not as comprehensive as, of course, like going to representatives that are, passing these bills and writing these things into legislation. But ultimately, we won't just stop these issues by just knocking one or two people out of office or by like emailing them away. We need to address the culture as it exists within our personal circles and communities too.
Yeah. No, I could agree with that. I don't have to be nonpartisan, so it's a whole bunch of white people trying to keep their majority, uh, and that pretty much explains that. Yeah, we'll move on. My last kind of question is based on advice, which is what would you give to Gen Z, right? It's such an ambiguous term, Gen Z. What does that even mean?
It is.
Yeah,
I don't even know.
exactly. How do we impact, our communities, you yourself use that as a role model. What do we say to the folks that are ignorant? How do we address them? And what about the folks that are engaged, the folks that don't have time, the folks that are trying but maybe they're more issue based than candidate or vice versa? What is your advice to the upcoming class of voters?
Step one is to find yourself and to set your own boundaries for how far you're willing to go. Step two is to find like minded people, and I'll elaborate in just a moment. And step three is to stop wasting your time with anyone that takes you away from who you are and what you want. I think a huge thing that a lot of people have advised me on personally, is not to get too broad with things because you'll find that like as you notice like certain disparities, you just want to talk about all of them. And that's not to say you can't hold opinions about different things and you can't hold like personal stances for yourself. But if you try to be an activist for every single thing, if I tried to stand up and like actively participate in every single organization that stood for every single one of my beliefs, I would not have a single functional muscle left in my body because that's just simply how it is. You need to pace yourself. So, whatever it is that you want to focus on right now, take that one thing and take it all the way, or as far as you personally can take it before you're willing to expand on other things or have this be an interdisciplinary lens with another subject. But don't burn yourself out, spreading yourself thin across multiple issues or multiple realms. You're not going to do anyone any proper service by burning yourself out while only remaining at the superficial level at this. I talk about finding your people too, and also just like staying away from people that aren't your people. And I don't just mean like minded people. I do definitely believe that people can be friends with people that have differing opinions from them to a degree, like your opinions cannot disrespect someone else's existence, right? But like differing opinions can exist among like friend groups and communities, and they're still functional because you need to have opposing viewpoints to see both sides of the coin or all the sides of the die. But still, I think it's really important to see like who is really going to be there for you and support you and not pay any mind to those who are never going to be someone you can lean on. A lot of this work will reveal to you like sides of people that maybe you didn't want to see. And it'll really make you wish that you had someone in your corner, especially when things get tough. Because some of these issues are unfortunately really controversial and really hard. So to not have full faith in your circle is to run a fool's errand the entire time. So don't waste your time with people that are never going to be there for you. Don't fret about their opinions. They're always going to have something to say. They're always going to just poke holes in your argument, even if there really are none to find. They're going to be just carving away at this brick wall, just hoping that your ego will shadow as a result. So stick with yours. Just figure out what that is first. That's all I'm going to say. It was a lot, but I hope that made sense.
Yeah. No, no sound advice. Uh, I got nothing to add there. Don't be a political dilettante. I just like to echo that. Um, but no, how can folks stay updated on what you do? If you wanna plug any of your socials or organization handles, I'll put them in the description.
So I'm not on social media, but you can probably find me. Well, if you're an Eastern student, you can probably find me through EMU Engage or Optimize Eastern. I can email you with like the verbiage too. Those are the organizations I'm doing a lot of this work through in these coming semesters. Um, I can put my email in too. I don't mind that.
Yeah, no, I'll just link the organizations. I think that's where folks can reach out and get some resources. And is there anything
For
you'd
sure.
like to add?
Um, I appreciate this opportunity to talk about these things. I do feel like, unfortunately, we generalize the topic of youth voting as just like, oh, yes, under 30s that are at the polls, when really there's so many aspects of this. So I appreciate you trying to spread some awareness about the realities of what it's like to be an under 30 voter in some areas of the United States.
Of course, no. And CNN should sponsor me for that. Shout out Anderson. No, I'm playing. Anyway, no, it's my pleasure to host any perspective. Really, that's what's key to voting rights. It's so central to all the issues. And that's why I enjoy this channel. I myself get to learn a lot from students like yourself. So it's easy, to communicate, but it's harder to spread that message and truly learn from it. So thank you for the work you do and for your perspective and insight on this very vital and critical issue we face in our time. Truly, so it's invaluable, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best too.
Yeah, yeah, I need all the luck I can get these days and sleep. But we'll leave that for another episode. Take care.